I rise this evening to speak on the long history of failed plans to locate national radioactive waste dumps here in Australia, at multiple sites across South Australia, the Northern Territory and indeed Western Australia, and to point out the disturbing consistency with which it is disproportionately Aboriginal land that is targeted, Aboriginal communities who are expected to host the most dangerous categories of industrial waste that this society is capable of producing. And it seems that so little has been learned since long ago the federal government embarked in 1991 or 1992 on a national site selection process to try and work out where the wastes from the HIFAR reactor at Sydney's Lucas Heights should go 30 years, more than 30 years after the reactor first went online. And it probably came as something of a surprise to the community then that 30 years after this industrial facility had been operating, there was still no coherent plan for the disposal of its waste products. And here we are now in 2016, and you have to ask, what on earth have we learned in that intervening time? One thing I think we can say with great confidence that we have learned is that a coercive attempt to dump radioactive waste on unwilling communities is doomed to fail. And that is not just the experience here in Australia, but international experience bears this out as well. And so little has been learned from a process that actually, in my view and in the view of some of my colleagues, actually held some promise. And I want to pay some tribute, I guess, to former Industry Minister Ian Macfarlane, probably not words that I would have expected to have said in this place, who, when the failed and disastrously failed proposal, supported by both the Liberal National and Labor parties, to dump this waste at Muckaty in the Northern Territory, finally came apart as a result of grassroots action led by strong Aboriginal families from the Barkly region, federal court intervention, a national and international campaign of opposition. When it finally fell apart in the federal court, Minister Ian Macfarlane actually took an opportunity and said, we're going to try something a bit different. And to his credit, he didn't simply nail another postcode on the map and say it's going over there. I think a historic opportunity potentially has been lost and has been missed, that opening that we could have actually put a proper process into is now at great risk of being squandered, because that process, again, started, in my view, asking the wrong question, and that is why it has come to the wrong answer at this point in time. I believe the wrong question to ask when it comes to those quantities of radioactive material, whether it be spent fuel, whether it be radioactive waste from the isotope plant at the Lucas Heights complex, whether it be the various other categories of medical waste and the trash and the gloves and the other items, or indeed whether it be radioactive wastes at various categories from mining operations. If the question that is being asked is simply which outstation should this stuff be dumped on, which remote Aboriginal community should host this material, what outback site can we dump this stuff out of sight, out of mind, if we start with that question, we inevitably come to the wrong answer. The answer that Minister Frydenberg has inherited, and again I want to acknowledge this is a process that he inherited midway through, and this is not something of his own design, but nonetheless it still funnels, if you will, from, in my view, the wrong question being asked. It funneled through a selection of a few dozen sites down to 6 and now apparently down to 1. And tonight we are going to have to take the Minister and the previous Minister at their words when they say that this will not be forced on an unwilling community. That this will not be forced. This is a consent-based proposal. As of tonight, we have to take that commitment on trust, because it doesn't appear to be the way that this is going. Of the 6 sites that were selected for shortlisting, and we now have a very short list, we have a short list of 1 place on Adnyamathanha country in the Flinders Ranges in South Australia. Myself, Senator Rob Sims and South Australian MLC Mark Parnell had the privilege of visiting that country at the invitation of Adnyamathanha traditional owners not that long ago, only a matter of 4 or 5 weeks ago. And I want to again thank them for the generosity of spirit with which they showed us their country. This is a site known as Bandiuda, also known as Wallabedina. And that area, we were told by senior women, is Anguliyada, or spiritual land. And there are culturally significant sites throughout the nominated area. Now, maybe this looked fine from Google Earth. Maybe this looked remote to those people in the reference groups or the various bureaucrats who've been tasked with finding somewhere for this material to go. Maybe it looked like the middle of nowhere. Maybe it looked like a long way from anywhere significant. Maybe it looked as though it had been submitted and a cattle station had been nominated by a former LNP senator. But in fact, this is tremendously important country for the Adnyamathanha, and these are people who have already suffered greatly at the hands of dispossession. And for anybody who thinks that the dispossession of Aboriginal land or questions of sovereignty or self-determination are from the colonial era, decades or 2 centuries ago, had best be paying attention to what is now unfolding in the Flinders Ranges. What the Adnyamathanha traditional owners said in the statement of the other day is that they don't want it, that this will be a no consent arrangement and that they are planning on fighting it. Here's what they said in their statement. This is of November 27, 2015, when they were still on the shortlist. They said the following: "It is flood land. The water comes from the hills and floods the plains, including the proposed dump site. Sometimes there are massive floods, the last one on 20 January 2006. The massive floods uproot huge trees. You can come out here now and see all the trees uprooted by the 2006 flood. In 1956, 50 years earlier to the day, a massive flood destroyed Kodabina Homestead and all the houses in the Hookena Township. The pub was destroyed by the 1956 flood and is now a pile of rocks." And we, Senator Sims and Mr Parnell and myself, at the invitation of those traditional owners, visited the site not that long ago. And you can see these enormous tree trunks that look as though they've been thrown there by giants. They were carried there by floodwaters that occasionally reconfigure the landscape. This isn't, you wouldn't even call this traditional wisdom as such. The wisdom of that place runs deeper, runs thousands of years deeper. But these are the memories of people who can tell us this is flood country. Do not put an industrial waste facility in these valleys. How it emerged that this place, of all of those that the government contemplated, ended up on a short list of one is absolutely beyond me. Of each of the 6 sites now narrowed to 1, there were statements of solidarity from the other 5 sites who have been let off the hook over the weekend. And I want to thank and acknowledge all of those communities who spoke up, and those families who, through no fault of their own, discovered that a neighbour decided that their land was going to be host to a radioactive waste site. It doesn't have to be like this. What the Greens think should happen next, instead of a gruesome and futile repeat of what was done to the Muckaty mob and those old women and men who did not need that additional stress placed on their shoulders, is to ask the right question before we simply move to citing decisions about where this shed or this hole in the ground should go. What we believe is needed now is an independent and deliberative inquiry into long-term isolation and stewardship options for this material, and learning from what countries overseas who are dealing with much larger inventories of this material than we are, what have they learned? Long-term isolation of this material and stewardship, rather than simply which outstation should we build the shed on. The second thing that we believe should happen while that inquiry is underway is to properly containerise in these 60-year licence caskets the existing spent fuel and reprocessed material that is lying at the moment at the Lucas Heights facility. We believe that that should be properly hardened and containerised. An audit of the existing collections of dispersed waste, non-reactor isotope investigation so we're not producing this waste, and a commitment to not take international waste. We need to respect the voices of the communities who are standing up and saying no.
Thank you, Senator Ludlam. Your time has expired. Senator